if we found out the Ark of the Covenant was in fact a real object and we know where it is and it does match the description of the Bible, that kind of changes everything.
Would finding the Ark of the Covenant change everything? Would it establish Christianity or the credibility of the Bible? Or should Joe be looking for a different artifact? We're going to explore this question and more. I'm glad you're with me. Let's get into it.
I mean, if we really find out the Ark of the Covenant was an actual object.
I think it was an actual object.
And you think it was some nuclear something or another? Like,
I don't know what it was. I think it's what is rightly described as an out-of-place artifact, because if you look at the description in the book of Exodus, the very precise dimensions of it, I think in modern terms we'd say 3 feet 9 inches long by 2 feet 3 inches high and wide. It's got a layer of gold, it's got a layer of wood, it's got another layer of gold. It's very precisely specified, like a blueprint in the book of Exodus. And then it shoots out jets of fire and kills completely innocent people. It kills 50,000 Philistines in the city of Ashdod when they briefly capture it from the Israelites and make the mistake of treating it like a tourist object. And they open the Ark of the Covenant and look inside, and suddenly everybody in that city is dying. And what they're dying of is cancerous tumors. This is described in the Old Testament. So it's intriguing that this object is so precisely specified and is reported to have done these terrible things.
It's just insane that we know where it is.
Well, we know that I believe Ethiopia has a very strong claim to it, but that's all I can say because I've not seen it myself. I've been right outside the door of that sanctuary chapel several times. But
did you bring a Geiger counter?
No. That would be a good thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine it was going nuts as you got close.
That would be a good thought.
I mean, it's not like it's going to be, if it's radioactive, it's not like it's going to be contained just this one small area. You're going to have traces of it that leak out.
It would be a good way to
especially if people are getting cataracts from being in the room with it.
Yeah.
And so 3 different people you talk to have cataracts from that.
Yeah. And,
wow.
they all blame the Ark. And one of them, it's a resonant phrase, which sticks in my memory. I asked him why, and he said the Ark is a thing of fire. Just that.
Did he describe it to you?
He did describe it as a box, rather like the biblical description, unsurprisingly. But
did he describe what it looked like the outside of it?
Gold.
Gold.
Mm-hmm. Gold.
Wow.
And of course, gold is a very good insulator. To me, the fascinating thing is that Ethiopia is the only country in the world that actually claims to have the Ark of the Covenant. That it's central to religion and culture in Ethiopia today. That there's much to support that argument, particularly in the form of the Falashas, the Ethiopian Jews, and their very ancient traditions about how they got to Ethiopia in the first place. In context of all of that, I think Ethiopia has a very good claim, very interesting claim, and that's why I wrote a book about it.
Okay, I think that in order to answer the question of where the Ark might be, the Ethiopian story is kind of fascinating. I think we need to understand what the Ark is, and Graham is even sort of curious about this. It's an out-of-place artifact. It's a thing of fire. And what does the Bible have to say about these sort of like innocent people? I know Graham sort of says these people, the Philistines were innocent. The Ark is just like destroying people and killing people. It sounds pretty bad. And to be honest, like I think there's some parts of the Old Testament that are kind of difficult for me. I'm a Christian myself, so this is part of the Bible. It's part of what I think is a coherent history of things that actually happen, but that doesn't mean it doesn't challenge me at times. And this is one of those areas. Are these innocent people? These are the Philistines. These are classically the enemies of Israel. God is sort of dwelling with Israel. He's bringing Israel into the promised land. He even said prior to this that he was going to wait. He was going to hold off and allow the Canaanite people, the people dwelling in the land that God had promised to Abraham, give them time to sort of get out. It's not a big place, and you see Egypt has been destroyed. It's like, guys, something's happening. You might want to, go this way, that way, or scram, And so as Israel conquers the promised land, the Philistines are still here. There's people that set themselves against the will of God here. So they are sort of enemies. They're deciding to go to war. And it's interesting because they know full well what God is up to. We can read it right here. 1 Samuel 4. I've got a passage from 1 Samuel 6, 2 Samuel 6. These are the Philistines. Woe to us! Who shall deliver us from the hand of these mighty gods? See, they're sort of thinking of polytheism and paganism, right? Okay, these mighty gods must have destroyed Egypt. They're giving this land to these people. They smote the Egyptians with all kinds of plagues, and so they are afraid of Israel because they know that God is with Israel, and yet they choose. Take courage, men of Philistia. You will become slaves to the Hebrews. They don't want to become slaves. Nobody would, as they have been slaves to you before. Be men and fight. So they decide to fight against the will of God. So are these then innocent people? I thought this was really, just again, fascinating. We'll get back into Graham and Joe, and I'll bring in Michael Heiser and Chuck Missler here in a second as we ask the question of what happened? Because the Bible just starts to kind of not mention the ark. It sort of falls into obscurity as Israel goes into these different conflicts and they're taken into exile, and there's kind of a lot to this story. So thanks for hanging in there with me as we unpack where the ark might be, whether it's Ethiopia or Mar-a-Lago. We'll get there when we get there. This is the passage that Graham was talking about, where they're struck down because they peek into the ark. They look at the ark. Now, who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God? That is an important part here in 1 Samuel 6. The holy God is dwelling with humanity, but humanity is not holy. We have to realize that. Are these innocent people? Well, show me an innocent person. Show me where this innocent person is. These people are choosing rebellion to God and therefore not innocent. We have fallen. We have been sort of driven out of Eden, and so we can't really touch God. We are not holy, so we have no business trying to touch the footstool of God or the seat of God or enter into God's presence on our terms. If you do that, if with sin, you become a grease spot. The holiness of God has that effect on sin. It will destroy sin. If I'm a container for sin, it will destroy me. Okay, so I cannot approach God from my own terms, which are sinful. And the Philistines know this. They understand this. Now, Uzzah was one of the ones that I thought maybe if anybody was innocent, it would probably be this guy who just tries to stabilize the ark as it's falling. And he dies. But again, it's this idea of approaching the holiness of God in a way that is not worthy of him. Okay, his irreverence. He was struck down because of his irreverence there. So that's it. Now to Graham's point, and I'm sorry this isn't quite the way I want to display this, but to Graham's point, the ark as a blueprint, I thought that was actually a pretty good observation from Graham. It is sort of a blueprint. And if it's a blueprint, what is it a blueprint for? And I'll ask you this question. We'll get back into Graham and some of these other people who are going to weigh in on this conversation. Is this the inverse of Eden? Because in Eden, before humanity fell into sin and disobedience, God says, don't eat of the fruit of the tree. But Eve is the one who says we can't touch it. It's Eve adding to the command of God that ends up kind of being a distortion of God's original plan. And so now the idea is, well, you can't touch the ark. So it is interestingly mirrors how humanity chose to engage in sort of the way God set up the blueprint for living in harmony with him, dwelling in Eden in harmony with him. We said, well, we shouldn't touch it. God says, don't eat it. We say, don't touch it. And now that God is dwelling with Israel and he's got this ark and he's got the tabernacle and it's this God showing that his desire is to dwell with humanity. And now you approach the ark and you touch it. Again, fallen humanity cannot engage with the holiness of God in that way, beginning from ourselves. We have to allow God to give us the blueprint, give us the instructions, and then we live in obedience and harmony to that. So I just thought that was interesting, the whole you can eat of the fruit and Eve says we can't touch it. Now God is saying, don't touch the ark, right? So let me know if I'm making too much of that. But again, the idea is God's holiness is God desires to dwell, even in his holiness, desires to dwell with fallen humanity. The ark is sort of a symbol of that. It's a thing of fire, right? So, like I said, I want to bring Michael Heiser in because I think he's a great person to enter into this dialogue. And we'll do a little bit with Chuck Missler as well, as he kind of represents the Ethiopian idea. Heiser's going to give us another idea, and then at the end, I will insert a third idea that I think is just kind of funny. And then I want to challenge the idea that the ark is the artifact that we should be looking for. I think there's another artifact that is evidence of God's interaction in human history that we should be looking for, and I think that we see.
There are a number of ark survival theories. All of them focus on the idea that the Ark of the Covenant was removed by Israelite priests for its own protection before Nebuchadnezzar ever got into Babylon, or even before that. Now, the most well-known of these is that of Graham Hancock, but it's a view that he didn't invent. He articulates this in his book, The Sign and the Seal. Now, Hancock believes that the ark was removed before or during the reign of the wicked apostate King Manasseh. And after its removal, the Ark of the Covenant was taken to Elephantine, at one time a Jewish colony in Egypt. And then it was moved again, ultimately, to Ethiopia. You say, well, why Ethiopia? Why would they do that? If there was a Jewish colony at Elephantine, why would they move it to Ethiopia? Well, the short answer is the Solomon Queen of Sheba story. The theory is that the Queen of Sheba was from Ethiopia. And when she visited Solomon, he gave her, according to 1 Kings 10:13, quote, all that she desired, unquote, which Hancock believes is a cryptic saying for, he got her pregnant, he's giving her a child. As the legend is told in the Ethiopic Kebra Nagast, which in translation means the glory of kings, the Queen of Sheba has Solomon's child and names him Menelik I. When the ark was taken out of the temple to prevent its defilement, it ultimately went to Ethiopia because Solomon's lineage was present in that country. Solomon was a descendant of David, to whose lineage God had promised the dynastic throne, according to 2 Samuel 7.
They apparently have been guarding this object that he brought there for over 2,400 years. That's the view. This legend isn't just a furious legend. They have put this in the constitution of the government of Ethiopia. Now, this was promoted by the early kings in Ethiopia so they could claim Solomonic descent. That's its origin. Now, we happen to know, if you know your Bible, you know that's not true. Because Josiah is much, much later, and the biblical record has the ark as a subject separate from all of this. And because most people who know their Bible know this legend can't be true, they dismiss the idea that the ark is in Ethiopia. What they overlook is that even though this legend's not true, the ark got down there by a different path.
One of the things that Missler points out in his it's sort of like an alternate Ethiopian ark theory, is this story from 2 Chronicles. Now, I'll also leave a link to the Bible and Bicycle video that I'm pulling from here. I thought I had the original of this, but I couldn't find it. So if anybody knows where the Michael Heiser interview and the Chuck Missler one is, Bible and the Bicycle did a great job of bringing these together. So shout out to that channel. It's a good channel. Check it out. Josiah is trying to set the temple in order. Basically, they're doing a Passover, sort of this revival going on in Israel, and he tells the Levites to put the holy ark in the house which Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, built. Now, what Missler will point out is, though Josiah told them to do this, he doesn't think that they did it. Because later on, after they've done the Passover, after all this, when Josiah had set the temple in order, Necho, king of Egypt, came up to make war at Carchemish on the Euphrates, and Josiah went out to engage him. So the question is, why Necho, king of Egypt, is going to war against Syria. He's going to bypass Israel. he's not fighting Israel, and yet Josiah goes out to engage him. And so some people would point out that the only reason to do this is if Necho, king of Egypt, had the ark, that the Levites brought the ark down, and now Josiah is trying to get it back. So, however, Josiah would not turn away from him, but disguised himself in order to make war with him, nor did he listen to the words of Necho. This is an important part of the passage. The words of Necho from the mouth of God. So this is not Necho, king of Egypt, saying, I speak for God, but that the chronicler is saying that Necho, king of Egypt, speaks from God. How could he speak from God unless the ark was present with him? That's kind of the theory here. Let me know what you think about that.
Sounds so ridiculous, and people go, what? The Ark of the Covenant's real? But then when you go into the history of these people that lived there, and they all suffered radiation poisoning, and it's like, wait a minute.
Cataracts over their eyes.
Yeah.
And let's not forget that there's an indigenous population of Old Testament Jews in Ethiopia, the Falashas, who have their own story about how the Ark of the Covenant got there.
Right.
Different from the Ethiopian national epic, which is called the Kebra Nagast, the glory of kings. That's why I got into this field. I was a current affairs guy, and Ethiopia was on my beat, and I just kept on coming across this story, and I realized it was central to Ethiopian culture, and I decided to investigate it and explore it, and it led to the sign and the seal. That's what set me on the path to fingerprints of the gods and everything that followed that.
So who is getting the cataracts?
The guardian of the ark. This is a monk who is appointed. The place is Aksum in the province of Tigray in northern Ethiopia. It's a massively interesting place. Aksum has these huge granite stelae. They're very similar in many ways to ancient Egyptian obelisks. They're a bit different in shape, but same sort of height, cut out of solid granite, right up there in the highlands of Ethiopia. And then they have an ancient church, the Church of St. Mary, Cathedral actually of St. Mary of Zion, where the ark apparently was kept for hundreds and hundreds of years. Before that it was kept elsewhere, and then now it's been moved into a chapel next to St. Mary of Zion Cathedral. And that chapel is guarded by armed men. The whole town is an armed camp that is protecting what they believe to be the Ark of the Covenant, but it's guarded particularly by one guy who is the official guardian of the ark, and he's elected by other monks to be the guardian of the ark. And so they're close to whatever this object is, they're close to it. And I met 3 of them over a succession of years, because their mortality is once they're appointed, they die very soon. And they all had these cataracts over their eyes, and they all blamed the object in that chapel, whether or not it's the ark, for causing their blindness.
Wow.
So it's
and no one is going in there and trying to get to the bottom of it? They won't let you?
They won't let you. They won't let you.
Can you bribe them?
No.
It seems like someone should go look.
Yeah.
What the hell is that?
Yeah.
What's in there?
What we've stumbled into here is a documented tradition. In 642 BC, Elephantine Island is an island in the Nile that at that time was the headquarters of Pharaoh Necho. 470 BC, it moves to Tanakirkos Island in Lake Tana, Ethiopia, and then in 330 it moves to Aksum. We'll track this here. And it's presently at St. Mary's of Zion Church, whatever it is they've been guarding. And they believe the Ethiopians believe it's destined to be presented to the Messiah when he rules on Mount Zion. So apparently the Levites, to get it out of harm's way, go down to Elephantine Island, the headquarters of Egypt, and seek protection from Pharaoh Necho. And Elephantine Island was a fortified capital, and the ark apparently stays there from 630 BC through about 430 BC, about 2 centuries. Then it moves down to Lake Tana. Way south is a gigantic lake, Lake Tana, and it's full of a lot of islands. And one of those islands is Tanakirkos Island. And it stays there for 800 years until it finally moves to Aksum, where it presumably is there still today. When you go to Aksum, there's a place called the St. Mary's Church of Zion. It's a sort of an unimposing fortress kind of thing, but that goes down underground, and there are tunnels all the way to the Red Sea. They've been guarding this thing for over 2,000 years. So it's and they take that very, very seriously.
Now, I want to bring in Michael Heiser to sort of summarize things for us. And actually, I've brought this up on the podcast before, but Michael Heiser and Graham Hancock were aware of each other's work. I don't think they knew each other, but Graham at one point references Michael Heiser on an earlier Joe Rogan podcast where they're talking about Zecharia Sitchin's, and they actually reference Michael Heiser's website, which I thought was interesting. I will leave a link to this from Heiser dealing with sort of Graham Hancock's ideas more in detail. I'll leave that in the description of the video, but here's Heiser sort of summarizing a lot of these points for us.
The Ethiopian view of what happened to the ark is my personal favorite, and so it's going to make me sad to tell you about how many problems it actually has, but it has numerous problems. First, ancient Sheba was not Ethiopia. Rather, it is the land of Saba in the southwest Arabian Peninsula, likely modern Yemen. So that's a significant disconnect. Second, the Keber Nagast, the holy book I alluded to earlier, was written 1,500 years after the events of Solomon and Sheba. So it is far removed from being a contemporary resource. Third, the biblical terminology of Solomon giving the queen, quote, her desire, unquote, does not elsewhere ever speak of pregnancy. So this meaning, the idea that Solomon got her pregnant, is nothing but speculation. Fourth, Graham Hancock specifically depends quite a bit on a medieval source to prop up this theory. The source is called Churches and Monasteries of Egypt. Again, the content of it is as old as the early 13th century. The book is written by Abu Saleh, in which the writer says that he saw the ark. The ark witnessed by Abu Saleh had Christian decorations on it, in other words, crosses, something that the actual ark didn't have. And given the fact that no one in the Old Testament was to ever touch the ark, it was transported with poles, remember, it is highly doubtful that what Abu Saleh saw was the real Ark of the Covenant. There's actually very little evidence to support of the ark surviving and winding up in Ethiopia. And so, yeah, I'm disappointed, but there are alternative theories. One Second Temple source, for instance, says that the Ark of our Covenant has been plundered. That is from 2 Esdras 10:22. Now, why would it say that? Why would you have a Second Temple period Jewish writer say that basically the ark was taken or destroyed, plundered? That source actually comes up with that idea because the Bible suggests it. Now let's start with a passage in Jeremiah, a contemporary of the destruction of the temple. In the book of Jeremiah, the prophet envisions a day in the distant future when the exiles of Judah who are about to be carried off to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar get to return to their homeland. And he writes, and this is from Jeremiah 3:14 through 16, quote, "Return, O faithless children, declares the Lord, for I am your master. I will take you one from a city and two from a family, and I will bring you to Zion. And I will give you shepherds after my own heart, who will feed you with knowledge and understanding. And when you have multiplied and been fruitful in the land in those days, declares the Lord, they shall no more say, the ark of the covenant of the Lord. It shall not come to mind or be remembered or missed. It shall not be made again." Now the key verse here is that last verse, verse 16, where the prophet describes the lament of people over the loss of the ark. There is simply no reason for people to desire that the Ark of the Covenant be made again, or that they would miss it, if it had not been lost. Now Lamentations 2, verse 1, this is a book also associated with the prophet Jeremiah. Now the entire book of Lamentations is a series of laments about the destruction of Jerusalem and its temple. Elsewhere, of course, you'll recall that the Ark of the Covenant was called the footstool of the Lord, for instance in 1 Chronicles 28:2. So Lamentations 2:1 says the Lord didn't remember his footstool, the Ark, at the time of his anger, which strongly suggests that it was lost, either plundered or destroyed. Lastly, the prophet Ezekiel had a lengthy vision of the future temple after the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. This you can read in Ezekiel 40 through 48. One thing you'll notice if you read those chapters in Ezekiel, that temple has no ark. It's entirely absent. Now, ark searchers contend that the ark survived so that one day it could be rediscovered and brought back to Jerusalem. But Ezekiel certainly isn't thinking in that direction. So unfortunately, in the end, the most coherent, and I would say the most biblical view, is the one that we really don't like. And that is the Ark of the Covenant was destroyed, either intentionally or maybe accidentally, by Nebuchadnezzar's army during the invasion. I mean, they would not necessarily have known what was in the temple if they just randomly burned it down. The verses that you actually see in Scripture that talk about the lament for the Ark and suggest the fate of the Ark point in this direction. Now, again, they're not conclusive, but this is what Scripture suggests, and therefore I think it is the most coherent view that we have to offer. And that would be the reason that the Ark of the Covenant isn't mentioned in the booty lists of things that Nebuchadnezzar took back, either in the Bible or in his own records. It was destroyed.
That one to me is so crazy that someone is keeping that information from the rest of the humans.
Yeah.
Because if we found out the Ark of the Covenant was in fact a real object and we know where it is and it does match the description of the Bible, that kind of changes everything. Now all of a sudden the Bible is not just stories and myths. The Bible is some sort of a historical record.
Yeah. Well, let's not forget that one of the world's best-known flood myths also comes from the Bible,
Right.
which is the flood of Noah.
All right, so are we with Graham Hancock? Are we with Chuck Missler? Are we with Michael Heiser? Or are we with James O'Keefe here? Are we wondering why Trump has a replica of the Ark in Mar-a-Lago, a replica? Of course, I'm sort of being silly here, but there's a point that I want to make about the true artifact that we should be looking for that makes it very interesting for someone to create a replica of the Ark. I don't know what to do with this. Some people would say maybe it's a replica, maybe it's not. Trump and his son-in-law have, sort of ties to Judaism or Israel, however you want to shake that out. Very curious. That's the fourth surprise theory there. If you made it here towards the end, we're not quite done wrapping this up, but thank you for being here. If you are here, I just think that we live in funny times, and so here you have a 6-pound gold replica of the Ark at Mar-a-Lago, where former President Trump resides. President Trump, former president. I don't know when you might, what part of the timeline you might be encountering this video, but going all the way back to the beginning, where is the Ark? I am going to side more with Michael Heiser than anyone. I think that there is some interesting goings-ons with the connection to Ethiopia and the reestablishment of the temple, but I don't know that that is God's plan. I think that there are those that would still try to sort of take things for themselves and take the claims of God rather than allowing God to unfold history in his own way at his own time. If you read all the way to Revelation 21 to reinforce Michael Heiser's point, I think the artifact that Joe Rogan and others should be looking for that would establish God's role in history, that we could see it clearly. Where do we see God's activity clearly in history? I think we see it in the church. Now, is that an artifact? Interestingly, it does seem like that's what the Spirit of God is creating. The Spirit of God creates the community that we know as the church. And in Revelation 21:22, we read about the city of God, and the lines are a little bit blurred. It's a city, it's a bride, it's a little bit of both. I think that God is preparing a dwelling place. It's a new heaven and a new earth. The old has passed away. It's restoring things. A new heaven and a new earth passed away. There is no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride, adorned for her husband. Now we call the church the bride of Christ. Verse 9, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And now this is 21, verse 16. The city is laid out in a square, going back to Graham's point about the blueprint. The ark is a blueprint for something. Now, I think that God ultimately sort of gives us these types of things like instructions, just like in the Garden of Eden. You can play in the tree, you can touch the tree, but don't eat of the fruit of the tree. There are parameters. God tells them to build the temple this way, thus far and no further. I've given you parameters. I've given you a blueprint. He does the same thing with the new city, the New Jerusalem. It's laid out in a square, interestingly enough. It's a cube, actually, and the only other cube that we know of as far as God's blueprints are concerned would be the Holy of Holies. It's equal on all of its measurements. And in verse 22, this is why I would side with Heiser and say the true artifact, where does God dwell? It's with his people. He's always been saying, I, the holy God, will dwell with my people. How is that made possible? Through the sacrifice of Christ, who is God and man, who unites God with humanity. Holy God and humanity being restored. Though we are sinful and in rebellion to God, we are being made new. I saw no temple in this city, right? This is verse 22. For the Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb are its temple. So we don't need the ark. We don't need the temple. Humanity has been reunited with our Creator through the work of Christ. And if we're looking for evidence of God in this world, now one could say maybe the Bible is sort of an artifact as well. It's miraculous, I believe, but I don't want to say that because I don't want to say I don't want to claim that the Bible is the artifact that we should be looking for to establish the historicity of the Bible. I want to encourage the church, the people of God, to be, I want to say worthy. We don't make ourselves worthy to be the bride of Christ. He makes us worthy. And so participate in that. If you go back, I did a couple of podcasts on this. We see kind of the world around us crumbling. Governments are going to crumble. Podcasts are going to crumble. All the things that we tend to rely on are going to crumble. But what about the community of people that we call the church, the bride of Christ? We are not perfect. We have had our problems, but even with Joe Rogan, he keeps going back to this. If you go all the way back to the Adam Curry episode, it's the people who are followers of Jesus who end up really influencing people towards Christ. It's the people, the bride of Christ, the community that's being built by the Spirit, that's sort of this artifact that establishes, that shows us, it's displaying for us that God is at work in human history. And maybe it is more perfect that God is using an imperfect vessel such as the church to do that work. So if you have made it here to the end, hopefully I teased that out enough. I don't know. I tend to not like to do that, but I just thought, actually it's this last clip from Joe and Graham that to me is the most important, which is why I put a little bit of it at the beginning. But now we know the Bible is not just myths and fairy tales and all that stuff. Well, I think it's the true myth. I think it's actually more true than just the facts of the matter, if you will. I think Joe eventually will see that. I think a lot of people will see that. I've done other podcasts on that. If you're interested, I will leave links to those below. And I'll catch you in the next one.